SAT and ACT and the SAT subject tests, particularly within the UC, the University of California application process. Then I'm going to talk about the comprehensive review and answer the biggest question that most students and parents have at this point. How are UC applicants evaluated for selection? And finally, I'm going to, the most importantly, I think, is to give you all some tips on how to utilize the personal insight question section of the application effectively, because this year, this is going to be probably more important than before. It was always important, but this year is going to be particularly important, and you'll all know why as I go through this presentation. So let's start with a high-level overview. This is your time frame, okay, for the UC application process. It starts in November. That's when the application filing period begins, and it concludes at the end of November. Okay, the application deadline is Monday, November 30th at 11:59 p.m. That's very, very important. I want to point this out, and I always do point this out, because don't forget that we are also subject to the limits of technology. So a lot of times what we notice, many, like 75% of the applicants will submit their application in the last week of the filing period deadline, and a large number of those students submit it on the last day. So again, if we're all familiar with internet and the bandwidth issues. It's not unknown to happen. I'm not going to say it always happens, but it's not unknown to happen that on the last day, if everybody tries to submit on that last day, we could bring down the servers, right? It can slow it down. So my recommendation to students always is you don't have to wait till the very last day. There's actually plenty of time between now and then to get your application in order perfectly, so then you can submit your application, feel good, breathe your first sigh of relief. Excuse me. And then the next part of the application timeframe is between December and February. Now, these 3 months, there's nothing for you to do from the application perspective other than answer any and all questions you may get from the admissions office. This is the time frame where the admissions office gets to work. It is their busiest by far. For UCI specifically, we received over 120,000 undergraduate applications last year. Based on preliminary data, it's already looking like we're going to probably be at that level, if not exceeded again. So we've been getting more and more applications every year since 2015. But during this period of time is when the applications are reviewed and evaluated. And all the applications are reviewed using the comprehensive review process, which I will talk about in a little bit. But December to February, the most important thing for you to realize is there's really not much you can do other than answer all the questions. If they're reaching out to you, it's because it's not to say hello, right? It's because they are reviewing your applications, they have questions. These questions are meant to help your application because it's usually to clarify some point. So check your email frequently, make sure the email coming from the university is not going to your junk mail, it's not going to your spam mail, that you're answering those questions. It is very important. Okay, then comes March. 2 important things happen in March. Number 1, March 2nd is the FAFSA filing deadline. For those of you who don't know, FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. Please fill out this application. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter whether you think you're going to get financial aid or not. If you want to apply for scholarships, most scholarships will want, as part of the requirement for the scholarship consideration, is for you to submit the FAFSA. Okay, so it's a free application. It doesn't take long. It's very simple compared to the college applications. It's very cut and dry, step by step. It just takes a little bit of time, but fill it out. It's free. It's going to be worth it. It's also the deadline to file a certified grade point average for the Cal grants. All of you should know, and I'm assuming we have a lot of students here today, or seniors, you should know about the Cal grants by now. Cal grants are entitlement grants from the state. If you meet the criteria and you are eligible, and you will get a grant. But in order to get it, you have to file your grade point average. You have to submit your application. So March is the deadline for that. We're not going to talk about Cal Grants today, but I would suggest you talk to your high school counselors if you haven't already. And also in March, it's very important because that's when the vast majority of the freshman admissions decisions are released. It's throughout March. For the private colleges, for the private schools, they do come out earlier. They do have an early admissions process, early decision process, not for the UCs. Some admit decisions can come out early for the UCs, for example, February, but vast majority of freshman admissions decisions come out in March, and I'm talking about the entire month of March. It could even be on the last day of March. So I know this is the most anxious time for students, and trust me, again, many years of experience on this. Come March, our office gets bombarded with email. When are you going to release decisions? When are you going to release decisions? And the answer is always the same, sometime this month. So just be aware of that. Okay, then the next major decision point is May, right? In March, the decisions are going to come out. You're going to have all of April to really weigh your options and think about, hey, where do I want to go to college? May 1 is the national SIR deadline. SIR is when you submit your statement of intent to register. That's basically when you tell the college that you're going to, hey, I'm coming to this school. For those of you who apply to UCI and select and will be admitted to UCI, I hope you will choose UCI. And then after May, the last deadline to kind of be aware of is July is the deadline for you to submit all your official documentations to the admissions office for verification. And that's a very practical, there's a very practical reason for that, right? Your application is all self-reported information. It's all things that, you're telling us you did. Well, we need those official documentations to validate and verify that, right? If you say you got all A's, well, we need to see your transcript to see you actually got all A's. So July is the deadline to submit all your official documentations. And if you're looking at the screen, I also put test scores. So that's interesting, right? Because this year we have some updates on test scores. It is still valid, it's not a mistake, but let's talk about that next. So as many of you have already heard, and I know it's very confusing, but the University of California Board of Regents has already decided that the University of California will no longer be using the SAT, ACT, and SAT subject exams as part of the admissions process, okay? What that means is it will not be used for comprehensive review, it would not be used for selection, and it would not be used for UC scholarships. Now, right here it says scholarships, but there are many types of scholarships. There are also private scholarships. We don't know anything about the private scholarships, but for UC scholarships, the SAT, ACT, and the subject exams will no longer be used in its consideration. What this means is when you submit your application, you will have a section on the application for you to report your test scores. However, and you should definitely report those. And I can talk more about that a little bit later. But what that means is when it comes to the admissions review process, no admissions personnel, nobody who's going to be doing the comprehensive review or the evaluation will see those scores. So everybody's on an equal footing. Those tests are no longer required. So a student who takes the test versus a student who doesn't take the test, they are on equal footing. I think the natural question is, well, Tony, is there an advantage to taking the SAT? There are certainly advantages in the overall matriculation process, but in terms of your admission selection decision, the decision, what goes into the review, there is no advantage. Okay. What's confusing, I think, is let me jump ahead to the next slide real quick. Is this information is can be found on the University of California website. It is public information. I included the URL where I got this information. Anyone can look this up. This is the plan that the University of California system-wide has published, right? You'll see it's a 5-year plan. It starts with 2 years of the test going optional. Then the following 2 years, the test being test blind, or the system going test blind. And then the last year is basically a TBD, to be determined. That's what UC system-wide has put out. The individual campuses has decided already that they are going to just move ahead to test blind. We're not even going to go into the test optional. this is not a well-known fact, just because unless you're in higher ed, it's not easily understood, or it's not well understood. But the individual campuses can select their own processes. Everyone's bound by the same policies, but everyone can determine how they want to implement it. So the implementation is where every campus is going to be different. So UC published this plan. The individual campuses individually all decided to go test blind. So as of right now, as of today, as far as I know, I know for a fact that 8 of the 9 UC undergraduate campuses are test blind. 2 days ago, I thought it was 7. As of 2 days ago, I thought it was all the schools except for UCLA and UC San Diego that have that are going to go test optional this year, which they can, right? You see on the screen right now, 2021, 2022, the plan is to go test optional and then go test blind. But as of today, as of 2 days ago, I learned UCLA has since then shifted and changed their position, and they're also going test blind for this year. I'm in the process of finding out if San Diego is also changing their mind. I haven't heard back. I would suggest for all the students who are applying to UC San Diego, check with that school. You should always check with the school that you're applying to. I can only talk to you about my experience, and all the information, like I said, is not secret. There's no secret sauce. There's no secret memo. All the information that I get all from the same source that you would get. The advantage that I have over you is that I'm more familiar with this information, so I can understand it. It's more clear to me. So hopefully I didn't confuse anybody with that. But just to my last attempt to bring clarity, for as far as I know, 8 of the 9 UC undergraduate campuses are all test blind starting right now this year. So when you submit the application right now this year live, your test scores will not be factored into the admissions process. Okay, San Diego might have changed. I'm not sure. So for those of you applying to UC San Diego, please check with that school. And again, it's not a secret. If you ask them, they're going to answer you very directly. Okay. I'm going to go back to this slide to just talk about this one last point, right? So even though that the SAT and the ACT and the subject tests are not going to be used for admissions decisioning or scholarships, they still can be used for class placement and credit towards your graduation from the UC. So these tests and the scores you receive, you can still get credit for. You can get units for in college. So is it important? I would say so. Absolutely. If you have the opportunity to take it, should you? Yeah, absolutely. These are all things that are good. That said, should you risk your health to do so? That's a very personal question. For me, I would say no personally, right? Because we are in the pandemic. I think safety is very important. I think we have to remain healthy. We have for ourselves and each other, right? So are the tests important? And some of you have already taken the SAT, have already taken the ACT before the pandemic. Some of you might have even taken some subject tests. That's fine. That's great. Report it. If and when the situation allows for SAT testing in the state of California again, should you take it? Again, very personal decision. You're gonna have to decide that. But what I can tell you is it is not useless, right? It is still useful, and it can help you in your overall college education. But for admission specifically, again, 8 of the 9 UC campuses are all going test blind for this year. Sorry to spend so much time on that issue, but I know that's one of the most pressing issues this year. I already kind of talked about this already, the difference between test optional and test blind, but just to really drive the point home, test optional basically means the tests are not required, but the campuses can still, may and can use any part of it in the admissions process, right? So that's kind of the more traditional way of thinking about the test. Test blind means it's 0, nothing. It will not be factored in. Not only will it not be factored in, it will not even be seen by the reviewers. So the reviewers truly will not know whether a student has taken it or has not. Okay, now we move on to the section where we really get into the meat of I think what all your anxieties are all about, and it's about how do the UCs choose? How do they select students? How is my application going to be evaluated. So every application, every single application, remember when I told you that that UCI received 124 or 125,000 undergraduate applications? Every single one of those applications go through a comprehensive review. Now, what is that? Comprehensive review is the policy, it's a UC-wide policy. Every campus has to do their evaluation of the of applications by going through this process. And I'm going to talk about the process in just a bit at the next slide. But another point I want to point out is that UCI specifically, this is not for all the campuses. Remember, I said every campus can choose how they implement the policies. But at UCI, every application is reviewed and rated by 2 independent readers. And it's blind read. In other words, if I got an application review, I don't know who the second reader is. So there is no collaboration. There is just, I got an application, I'm going to give a rating. Another reader is going to get your application, you're going to get a rating. Now, if the 2 ratings differ greatly, then the application is reviewed by a 3rd and final reader. So if my assessment and another reader's assessment is the same, then that's the rating you receive through through our process. But if if I have a rating and another person has a rating and it's different, it passes some threshold, then it gets reviewed by a 3rd person. So if you think about that, 120, let's just say 120,000 applications. Every application gets reviewed twice, right? That's multiplied by 2. That's a lot of reading, and that's what happens between December and February. All that has to be done. So while we're on break, Christmas break or winter break, admissions offices tend to that's their hardest working period of time because there's a lot of applications to go through. Okay, so what is the comprehensive review? The comprehensive review essentially states states that these are the factors, and there are 14 that can be used to rate and evaluate an application. Forgive me, I know it's on the screen, but it is important, so I will go through all 14 quickly, right? These are the 14 points. So what are the factors? Grade point average is a factor. Test scores are a factor. Courses completed beyond the minimum A through G requirements. So this is your course taking pattern. Honors and AP and IB courses that you've taken. Whether or not you are designated as eligible in the local context, ELC. I can talk a little bit more about that later. Essentially, well, I'll just mention it now. ELC means you've been identified as the top 9% of your class at your school. The next factor is the quality of your senior year program. A lot of students ask this question, does it matter, my senior year? And the answer is yes, right? That's something that we can look at. For example, some students take calculus by their junior year. And the question that I get sometimes is, well, Tony, I finished the highest level of math in my high school. Can I take a break senior year? And the answer is, well, you can technically. You've met all the requirements in calculus. You've ended with calculus. That's great. My God. However, for an evaluator, they're going to look at your transcript and say like, well, yeah, you took calculus your junior year, but why didn't you do something else your senior year when somebody else did? Right. So a lot of it is context based. So the quality of senior year is your senior year is very important. We also look at the academic opportunities in secondary school. So basically, what opportunities are available in your school, and did you take advantage of them, and how did you take advantage of them, and what did it mean to you? We're looking for outstanding performances in academic subject areas. For example, it could be literature, it could be drama, it could be mathematics, science, physics, right? Any evidence of theirs that shows that there's outstanding performance in a specific academic subject. We look for that. Achievements in special projects, improvement in academic performance, special talents and achievements and awards, participation in educational preparation programs, academic accomplishments within your life experiences, and geographic location. So these are the 14 factors. Now, there are 14, and I want you to know, I did not list them, right? I did not say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 14. Instead, I used bulleted points. The reason why I do this is actually very deliberate. The reason I do this is because I don't want, when you order something from 1 to, whatever number, there's a tendency to think that it is ordered in the order of importance. And it's not. These factors, not one factor is more weighed heavily than another factor. These are just all the factors that every campus can use. A campus does not have to even use all 14. They can use any combination of these 14. So it really depends on the campus. Okay, so again, the main point here is there are 14 factors. You can get these off the internet on the University of California website, and not one is more important than the other. That said, I do want to point out these 4 factors, and the reason why I'm pointing them out is not to say that they're more important. They're not. I'm pointing this out to highlight that from our experience, these are the ones that students tend to misunderstand or to leave out. So I already talked about the quality of the senior year program, right? Basically, what classes are you taking your senior year? Are you still taking a full load, or are you taking it easy? That's something we do look at. Improvement in academic performance. We call this out because a lot of times students think that, oh my God, I have to have a straight A. I have to be a straight A student, and I have to take all AP and all honors in order to even be eligible, qualified to come to, to attend a UC school. And that's not the case. We look for improvement in academic performance. Maybe somebody had a rough start, but then later on they showed this trend where they're just doing better and better. That's important to call out. Okay, that's something that's something that we look for in the comprehensive review. Participation in educational preparation programs. If you participate in any sort of educational program, don't just discount that. Don't think, it's not that important. Yeah, I did it because, it was important to me, but I'm sure they don't care about that. Everything is important. Everything provides context. So if you do participate in education preparation programs, list it, talk about it in your personal insight question, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And lastly, this point I'm calling out only because it is perhaps the most misunderstood. Geographic location. There's really nothing you can do about that. There's nothing you need to account for. This is to point out that the University of California does take into account the location of a school, where the school is, and that is to build in context, right? It's no secret that there are areas of the state that are better resourced than others. Here's an example. You might go to a school where there are 20 some AP courses for you to select from. There are schools where that's not the case, where there's probably only 4 AP for a student to choose from. So when you take those considerations into context, it does impact how an evaluator is going to look at an application overall. Okay, so it's all about. So I'm pointing this out just to let you know that it is a factor. There's really nothing any student can do about it, because where you live is where you live. Where you go to school is where you go to school. Okay, we're on to the last section. I'm looking at the time. I'm doing pretty good. I want to try to get this done within the next 10 minutes or so, so then we can move on to questions that you may have. So here are some tips on how you can use the personal insight questions section of these applications effectively. This is important because with the absence of the SAT, of the test scores, that really takes away another factor that admissions offices can use to provide more context into your A student's overall application. So the only real way for you to distinguish yourself and to really drive the point home and really tie your application together in a way where an evaluator, a person who can't understand you, is the personal insight questions. So the personal insight questions with this latest change in the test scores become highly, highly, highly important. I mean, it was already important before, and now it just ramps it up to the next level. It is super important. I don't say that to put additional pressure on you. And I know a lot of students are feeling very pressured. Historically, students have always felt pressure from the section, and I understand it, I get it. And I'm not saying that it's more important to give you more stress, but only that this is where your attention should be. When I was asked to give this presentation, I was very deliberate to pick this day to do the presentation because I wanted to do it sooner rather than later. Because as of right now, you still have time to go back and make changes and make additions and make refinements. Okay, so everyone after this should feel like, okay, I got some good information. Now let me look at my personal insight questions again for those of you who started. If not, now you have a better launching pad from which you can start your personal insight question section. Okay, so these are there are 8 questions, and I have them on the screen. I'm not going to read it to you. You guys can read it on your own, but there are 8 questions, right? I've numbered them from 1 to 4, not in order of priority, but just to say that there are 8. There's the first 4, there's the next 4, okay? Here are the directions. Oh, by the way, I'm not, I hope I'm not just glossing over it. I'm not reading it because I don't want to take time away, and I know time is very precious here. So here are the directions. You have 8 questions to choose from. You must respond to only 4 of the 8. This is very important. You will only be able to choose 4 of the 8. Okay. A lot of students are, overachievers, and of course you're overachievers. That's why you want to come to the UC, but you can't answer more than 4. Okay. So choose your questions strategically, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Each response is limited to a maximum word of 350. This is something I've even had to correct my colleagues about, because a lot of people still talk about the personal insight question section as a personal statement section or a college essay. It is neither of those things. It is not a statement. It's a response to a question, to which you only are limited to 350 words, right? So this is important because a lot of times, even teachers likes to think about this as, this is your writing sample. We have to, the UCs are going to look at how well you write. And that is not the case, actually. It's actually the complete opposite. In the admissions review process, we don't care about the proficiency of your writing, okay? We only care that we understand what you're talking about, okay? You're not being judged at the quality of your writing. You're not being judged in using writing correct or creative writing techniques or mechanics, right? It is really just, here's the question, answer it, right? And the whole point of it is so that the reader understands you better as an applicant. The last point on this and the directions, and by the way, this is again, no secret sauce here, right? This is directly lifted from the University of California website. Whichever question you choose is entirely up to you, but you should select the questions that are the most relevant to your experience and that best reflect your individual circumstance. And this is what I was talking about. There are no secret combinations, secret codes, right? This is not a trick question. There are 8 questions. Choose 4 that best reflect who you are as a person. Talk about things that you can talk about. If a question, you're thinking to yourself, like, I don't know how to answer this question. Yeah, that's probably not a question you should answer, right? You got to pick something that you're like, hey, I can talk about this, or I want to talk about this because it helps me strategically to be able to package my entire application. So those are the directions. Here are the tips. Here are the insights. Here are the things for you to keep in mind. All the questions are equal. Okay, there is no, this is the secret combination of questions you should select, right? Pick ones that are best for you. All the questions are weighted equally. It really truly does not matter to the evaluator which question you select. All are given equal consideration in the process, right? There is no advantage or disadvantage from choosing any of the questions. There is no right and wrong way to answer these questions. There truly is not. And this is the one, and I stress this only because from my experience, this is the one that students have a hard time grappling with. But really, are you really, there's no right way or wrong way to answer it? There really isn't. There's only the right, I'll tell you what, from my experience, the right way is if you can read it and I have a good understanding of who you are, and I can repeat it back to you and say, yeah, that's what I meant, then you did it the right way. If you write something and I'm reading it and I say like, well, it sounds to me that this is what you're saying and it's not representative of you, then you did it the wrong way, right? Other than that, there's no magic incantation. There's no magic words that you should use that's going to help you get an edge, right? It's all about communicating to the reader who you are. And by the way, you have no idea who the reader is going to be, right? It could be someone like me. It can be someone who's totally opposite of me. So keep that in mind. So don't let that stress you out. And remember that this section, these questions, it's all about getting to know who you are. We want to get to know your personality, your background, your interests and achievements, and in your unique voice, in just who you are. So this is the point of the personal insight question really is to provide an overall context. It's the glue that, let I'm trying to think of a good analogy. I've been told that this analogy is not necessarily, it makes sense in my mind, but it's kind of hit and miss when I use it, but I'm going to try it with you all today. If you think about a pizza, right? You got your different ingredients. You got your pepperoni, you got your mushrooms, your onions, you got your sausage, whatever, right? If you think about a pizza, you have all these ingredients, right? The personal insight question is the cheese on that pizza. It's that component that holds everything together, right, into one. That's what does it. So the personal insight question is meant to take all these different pieces, these different data you're going to enter into the application, and it puts it into one nice package, into a context, so when the reader reads it, they understand who you are as a student. And here's some tips that will help you do that. Select questions that are the most relevant to your experience. Okay, it has to be about you. Don't look at your friend. Don't call your friend and say, hey, how did you write yours? Don't do that. Okay, because that works for them. That's not going to work for you, right? It's a very personal thing, personal insight, right? Use I statements. Okay, this is not the case. This is not the time for you to be shy. And I know this is very hard. And I would say, even from my own personal experience, this is very hard for students from Chinese backgrounds, right? Because, culturally, we are taught to downplay our accomplishments, right? Not to focus on the I, right? So much. Don't be so self-centered. But in this particular case, you want to be self-centered. If that's your tendency, you want to fight that tendency. You have to brag about yourself, and there's a very logical reason, and there's a very practical reason. Okay, you have to brag about yourself because when your application is sitting in front of the reader, no one else is going to brag for you. The reader is not going to assume anything. That's one of the things we train our readers to do. Never assume. Okay, never make inferences. You can only make assessments based on what you read and the information that you have. So if your intent is just like, well, I don't want to, brag about myself, so I'll talk about all the stuff around it, and hopefully they'll understand how awesome I am. No. The better strategy is, this is how awesome I am, and let me tell you why. And these are the reasons. And I know it sounds contrary to our cultural upbringing, but that's what it takes. Okay, so use I statements, brag about yourself because you are awesome, and we want to know why. Okay, help the readers understand your context and your environment. So much of the application is context driven. It is very, very important for you to keep that in mind. Okay, we want to know about everything that's happening around you. We need to understand your particular situation. I'll go back to the example that I gave about the AP, right? The availability of AP classes. Now imagine this, and these are extreme examples, but imagine this. You have two applicants, they both took 4 AP classes. Now, one student took 4 AP classes because that's all the AP courses that are offered at their school. The other student took 4 AP classes, but there are 20 available AP courses at their school. The two contexts will matters, right? Because on the one hand, you can say, like, this student who took 4 AP classes took full advantage of everything that was available to them, whereas the other student took only a subset of took advantage of a subset of the opportunities available to them. So context is very important. The next tip is, this sounds kind of hokey, but it does help. Have someone verbally ask you the questions, and then you give the answers. You can try recording it. I know it sounds strange, but it does help, because sometimes when we say things out loud versus thinking them in our head, it makes a big difference. There's a gap. So try that. I know it might feel weird, it might feel uncomfortable. It may not, but it's a good strategy. You want to solicit feedback. This is the one time you don't want to be shy about it. You want to get as much feedback as you can. And the question you want to ask is, hey, does this sound like me, right? You have to brag about yourself. So you want to talk about your accomplishments, right? So get feedback. You want to also fill in the whole application, thoroughly, and then look at your personal insight questions, right? Because again, the applications are just data points, right? I took this class, I got this grade, I got this award, I volunteered here, I did this many hours computer service. The personal insight question is where you put all that into context, into one package. So the personal statement is in addition to, right? It is the additive piece to your application. You want to compose your responses outside of the application and then cut and paste in the final draft into the application, because your application will time out. So it also gives you a lot of pressure to finish quickly. I would say don't even worry about it. You can start the application, write the personal insight questions on the side, cut and paste at the very end. And finally, relax. I know that's hard to do. I know that's easier said than done, but try your best to remind yourself to relax, because your admissions decision doesn't come down to just your personal insight question. I know it's important. I was telling you that it is important, but it's only important as part of the whole. Okay. You have to also realize there's so many things outside of your control. So, do your best, take it seriously, give yourself enough time, but also when you're done, remember to relax, because again, as long as you can walk away from that experience, writing your personal name and submitting the application, that you've done your best, that's really awesome. That's really amazing. That's the key. Okay. Okay, one last bonus tip and we're done, and then we'll open up to questions. I'll start by answering some of the preliminary questions I already received, but there is another section in the application after the personal insight question. Some of you probably already seen this. It's called the additional comments section. This is kind of like a bonus. This is a really cool place for you to actually add more words to do more explaining, right? And here you have a 550 word limit in this section to talk about whatever. Okay, so what are the things you can talk about that's going to be helpful? Well, you can share information regarding your school environment, the grading system, honors and advanced curriculum, just something about your school. If you want to talk about your school, to put into context your achievements or what you've done in school, this is the place to do it. 550 words. There's a lot of opportunities here. Share any information about an unusual circumstance. And I would say this year, everyone has a lot of unusual circumstances. Why not talk about it, right? But if you also have an unusual circumstance that's contributed to your performance in school, both good or bad, talk about it. We want to know. Don't think the worst case that can happen is the readers will read it and think, this doesn't help me. Okay, they're not going to not admit, you're not going to get a high, you're not going to get a high rating because you put in too much information, right? So, if you think it's going to be important for the reader to know, put it in. Provide additional clarification on important details in your applications, right? And then describe anything else that you have not had the opportunity to include anywhere else. So when you look at your application in its entirety and you think like, man, this is something that's important about my situation. I want the reader to know. This is where you can put it down. And in this year, COVID related issues is something that you don't want to gloss over. It's not a small thing. If COVID has impacted you, talk about it. Don't think like, oh, it's not important because everybody has the same challenges. And that may be true, but this is your chance. This is your chance. This is your application. Okay, so take advantage of this section. Really, it's a gift. 550 words. Woo! And that is it. I'm looking at my time. I did pretty good. 10:45. That leaves 15 minutes for questions and answers. I will unshare my screen out and pass it back to SCCCC.
Thank you, Dr. Hwang. Do you need to maybe take a sip of water?
I will take a sip of water, Cheer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, now we will share our screen for the questions that we collected from the registrations. And I would give some time for everybody to look at these questions, and then we'll toss it back to you.
Okay. Well, I know time is short and I know there are a lot of questions, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I have my sip of water. I'm ready to go. So first question, is a 5-point on the AP foreign language grade or 2 years of foreign language good enough for foreign language admission requirements? Yes, absolutely. So the A through G eligibility, right, the course taking pattern, it requires 2 years of foreign language minimally. So you can do those 2 years. Or if you can get that AP, which is equivalent of 4 years, you're gonna meet that requirement. That said, again, UC admissions process is highly selective. The question that the reader will say is, okay, I can see that you got a 5 on this foreign language test, which means you fulfill that requirement, but did you just leave that space open? Why didn't you keep going? Why didn't you challenge yourself with another language, right? So this is something that you can also talk about in your personal insight question or in the additional comment section, right? That's a question that's going to come up. But from a technical standpoint, did you meet that requirement? Yes, you absolutely met that requirement. Question 2, if an applicant is in sports team but does not have high individual ranking, what other characteristics does UCI evaluate for this applicant? So if you're asking from the perspective of a athlete, if you're applying as a recruited athlete, I mean, it's a little bit different because you have to be recruited. But if you're saying like, well, no, I'm just saying that, you know, I participate in sports, you know, but I don't have high rankings, should I even, you know, include it in my college application? The answer is yes, absolutely, because it's something extra you did, right? It is a co-curricular activity. If it's important to you, you should talk about it, right? Now, I've seen cases where students, you know, put down their application and they say, oh yeah, I was in, for example, I was in basketball for all 4 years. Okay, they don't talk about rankings, and quite frankly, if you're not applying as a student athlete, it doesn't even matter about the rankings. But they just put down 4 years of basketball, but they don't mention it at all in their personal insight question. My question is, wow, you spent a lot of time in basketball. Why didn't you talk about it? Was it not meaningful to you? Maybe it wasn't. Maybe, and that's fine. That's fair. But I would think, right, logically, if you put 4 years into something, that it probably did mean something to you, right? So yes, definitely included. What characteristics does UCI evaluate on this applicant? I would say that's, you know, that's anything on those 14 comprehensive factors that I talked about in my presentation. What are the popular majors in each of the UC universities? This is an interesting question, a very popular question, actually. I think the question really is, and I could be mistaken for this particular person who submitted this question, but I think the question is, what are the impacted majors in each UC university? Because if you're talking about just popular, you just want to know, like, hey, you know, what's your most enrolled major at university? You can get that from the admissions website. That's easy. That's just marketing, right? But usually when I get this question, the students wants to know, like, what are the impacted majors, so then I can either avoid it because I think I can increase my chances of being admitted, or I can better prepare myself to, you know, for the reality when I apply to that major. So for example, a impacted major at UCI is engineering. Okay, that's just one, right? School of Business is also another impacted major. So is our nursing program, right? That's another impacted major. What impacted means there is higher demand than there are spaces for. So they tend to be very competitive. I tend to encourage students to shy away from that question, only because, you know, if you apply, if you know you want to study engineering, but then you just heard someone like me say, like, well, engineering is an impacted major at UCI. If your inclination is, oh, I better not apply to engineering because I really want to go to UCI, so I'm going to apply as an arts major, right? Or whatever major, right? Something that, you know, these games that we've all played in our heads, right? We're trying to beat the odds. The worst thing that can happen to you as a student in that situation is to be admitted to UCI in another major than your intended major, because that's going to delay your time to graduation, right? And it's not even a guarantee that you're going to end up in that major. That type of strategy has long passed. Where you know, times have changed. The numbers are at a point that, you know, students should not play these games, should not play the odds games, because it invariably leads to disappointment, and that translates to money and time. Okay, apply to, if you want to study engineering, apply to the campus as an engineering major. At UCI, we do give you an alternate major, right? You have the ability to list an alternate major that you want to be considered. You can even be admitted as an undecided, undeclared, right? But at that point, you want to really ask yourself, you know, is that really what I want to do, right? It's problematic from my perspective as a educator and as an administrator, when students can't get started in their intended major right off the bat. Okay, but this only applies to students who know exactly what they want. If not, then hey, you know, pick something that you're interested in. The next question: what are the Asian admissions rates for the past 3 years in the UC system? That's an interesting question. I'm going to talk about that last, because I actually do have a website that I can give you. I can show you. It's a public website. It's on the UC University of California website that has all these statistics for you to look at. So I'm not going to skip that question, but I'm going to put that question to the end. Number 5 is the entire UC system test blind. I think I talked about that, right? UCLA officer said that said so, but the website hasn't changed. Exactly, right? That was only as of 2 days ago that changed. But yes, as far as I know, 8 of the 9 UC campuses are test blind, including most recently including UCLA. Number 6, if a student chooses a declared major, will it be easy to switch to any major later on? Yeah, that's a tough question to answer. I mean, and easy is very subjective. It depends. It all depends. If the question was, is it possible to switch to any major later on? The answer is yes, it is possible. How easy? Oh, that's hard to say. That's really hard to say. This is why I advise students not to play that game unless you're truly in that situation. Just to let everybody know, I was undecided and declared. Nothing wrong with that. Number 7, impact of SAT, ACT, PSAT in the following 5 years. Yeah, that's a big question. I can talk about, we can have a long conversation about that. I mean, and really, your crystal ball is, probably just as good as my crystal ball. But admittedly, with my experience, what my crystal ball is telling me is that it's going to be kind of crazy, because part of that, if you, I don't know if everyone looked at or remember that slide I showed you, and again, you can look it up on the website. The last year is the UC is going to try to develop its own standard assessment test, right? It's going to create its own SAT. That's a tough one. That's a tough one because, think what you want about the ACT or the SAT, but they've been doing this for decades. They've done plenty of research. So for the UCs to be able to say that, yeah, we're gonna, just give us 5 years and we'll come up with something better. Oh, that's a big question mark. What I'm sharing with you is my personal opinion. It is not the stance of the University of California, Irvine. It's not the stance of anything official. It's just my personal opinion. Like I said, your crystal ball, probably better, just as good as my crystal ball. Number 8, are all UC test blind? I think I talked about that already. 9, do we need to send SAT scores if we have it? Do you need to? Yeah, I mean, well, I would say you want to, you should, right? So I don't know if it's a matter of need versus it's a matter of your own best interest to send it. Because again, it can be used for placement, and it can also potentially get you college credit. What will happen if I submit my SAT, ACT subject scores? What will happen? Good things will happen. Your scores can be used for placement testing. So for example, what level entry level writing course you get placed into, right? It can be used for scholarship, for non-UC scholarships selection. It can be used potentially to satisfy some graduation requirements. So if you submit your score, the university will get them and we will use them to benefit the students. It's just, it won't be used for admissions. Is there another slide to these questions, or is it only these 10?
Yes, we have another slide.
Okay. I feel like a contestant on Jeopardy. I think I'm doing pretty good.
Yes, I think you will be the winner.
All right. I'm gonna need help with number 11.
Okay. UC 给予加州居民的学费优惠，对居住有什么具体条件？ So
unfortunately, I don't understand the question.
Okay, so I'm going to try to translate this. Basically, it's asking the UC that's giving the residents the tuition difference or the tuition advantage. What's the requirement for this this benefit or the tuition level?
So there's only two types of from a tuition perspective. There's only two options, right? There's resident fees and there's non-resident fees. So if you're a California resident, you pay the resident fees. And if you're a non-California resident, then you pay non-resident fees. It doesn't matter if non-resident doesn't just mean international, right? A non-resident of California could be anyone from the other 49 states. So it could be from Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, all the way to, Maine, New York, Florida, right? These are all non-residents Californians, and they pay the non-resident tuition. So if you're a resident of California, and when you go through the application, after the application process, when you go through the matriculation process, the enrollment process, there is a step where you have to basically prove your residency. For most Californian students, you don't have to worry about that because one of the criteria is you went to a California school for, all 4 years. I mean, there's some other stuff too, that you're going to meet that criteria. So it's nothing that a student chooses. It's more of the UC identifies which one you belong to, which bucket. I hope that answers the question. Number 12, need to prepare ACT or SAT? Well, if you plan on taking it, then it helps to prepare, and it's like anything else. If you are not planning to take the ACT or SAT because you are not required to, then you don't. Number 13, how does the new UC application affect the class of 2025? Do these students still need to take the ACT or SAT? I think I've answered that already. So, 2025, really, and it seems like admission changes every year, really. So it's hard to say what's going to happen in 2025, but assuming 2025 is the same as 2020 or 2021, the cycle we're in now, then no, you won't need to take the SAT or ACT. I don't see this changing in the near future. Number 14, are all UC schools test blind? Answered that already. Is the guarantee of admissions for top 9% California students? Yes, it is. That's that ELC I was talking about. Now, I want to be clear about this. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. The top 9%, right? ELC, eligibility in the local context. It is a guarantee to the University of California system. In other words, you are not guaranteed to the campus of your choice, but you are guaranteed a spot somewhere in the University of California. If you are in the top 9%, you will definitely be admitted to one of the 9 UCs. That's what the guarantee is. Number 15, Irvine students apply.
Tony,
yes.
Dr. Hwang, actually, I want to jump in that question because we received a similar question in the chat room. Someone was asking, how do I know that my child is qualified for ELC? And then there's a participant also answered that some schools publish their class rankings, which means it's easy for some schools to report their top percentages. However, to add on to the question, what if our school doesn't do that? My school does not report class. Yeah.
So the ELC is actually a program. Okay. So all the schools in the state of California has to submit, and they have to participate in the program. So the schools actually, there's nothing you can do as a student. Okay. So students' parents, there's nothing you need to do other than if you want to find out if your school participates. When the school participates, they submit the top 14% of that school. They submit information about that top 14%, including transcripts and everything, and they get evaluated by the University of California. From the top 14%, the UCs decide who the top 9% are from that top 14%. So the first step is for parents and students to find out if your school has already done that. Most of the schools that I've worked with, that I've known, and again, I've been in this field in a long time. If you're in a public school in California, I'd be hard pressed to find a school that isn't participating. Even for a lot of the private schools, it's not a new program, they're participating. So most schools do participate. But if you're not sure, you can ask your school, ask your counselor. They'll tell you straight away. Now, I would worry if they say, like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's probably an indication that they don't participate. So the UCs do not go check the rankings of the high schools in California, right? The UC is not incumbent upon the UC. If you want to participate, the school wants to participate, they have to submit it.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that answers that question. Yep, no problem. Irvine students apply, UCI is equally considered. What kinds of standards? Yes, all students are considered equally, regardless of where they go or where they come from. I hesitated only because the only difference is UC, the non-resident students does have a higher eligibility requirement than in-state students. So for example, in-state minimum GPA requirement is 3.0, non-resident GPA minimum GPA requirement is 3.4. So the California residents are at an advantage from that perspective, but all Californian students have the same chance. There are no advantages just because Irvine students apply to UCI. There's no advantage or disadvantage. Without SAT or ACT score, how will UC set up qualification standard? Yeah, that's a good question, and that goes back to the comprehensive review process that I was telling you about, and I kind of talked about Irvine's process in terms of evaluation and assessment. Is SAT important for students graduating 2020? I think I answered that question already too. It's important from the standpoint that it can help you get college credit, and it can help you with placement testing and perhaps some private scholarships. Recommendations for summer camp and extracurriculars, anything that you find interesting that's going to help you develop yourself as a student, as a person, do it. It's all extra, right? It's all good stuff. Anything that's going to help you ignite that desire to learn, to excel. These are all good things. And if that can be translated in your applications, that's the goal. But no, there is no specific extracurricular that we're looking for, like, oh, this person did this, boom, you're in. That doesn't happen. That doesn't matter.
Okay, Dr. Hwang, along that same question, someone in the chat room did ask, what is participation in educational preparation programs? And if you have some examples of that.
Sure. For example, there are the state-sponsored educational preparation programs. For example, the Early Academic Outreach Program, the federally sponsored programs, Upward Bound, there's MESA, there's CAMP. There's also Cosmos. So that actually goes back to that number 18, summer camps, right? Cosmos is a UC initiated summer program that's STEM based. It could be, any school sponsored, any program that's sponsored by your local school that at your school locally that is meant to help prepare certain students for, certain things. I don't know, like engineering, for example. Sorry, that's just the first example that came to my mind. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Starting, I think we're on the last question too, 19. Starting with the class of 2023, how will students be evaluated for admissions if it is test blind? Yeah, again, good question. That seems like so far off, but well, first of all, yeah, you're talking about that middle 2 years, and we're already there. It's funny because the UC system put out this 5-year plan, but all the campuses are kind of skipping over option and going straight to test blind. So we are at 2023 already in that respect.